While the glider kept many hands busy, morale in the castle was the responsibility of another team of workers. For months, the encouraging news of the war could be followed on a secret radio, smuggled into the camp.
British and Canadian troops of the 8th Army have landed in southern Italy. At 4:30 this Friday morning, on the 4th anniversary of the beginning of the war,
But progress outside still offered no hope of immediate release. Many of the inmates of Colditz prison were now spending their 4th year in captivity. Inventive minds had to think of other ways of escape. Brewing and distilling alcohol, although forbidden, had always been limited by how much sugar and raisins the POWs could get from the Red Cross parcels. That all changed when it was discovered that the German ration jam, made from turnips, actually contained enough sugar for fermentation. From that day on, an industry was born. For some POWs like George Drew and Pat Ferguson, it was a process which they perfected.
What was the worst part about being a prisoner? The bloody boredom. How did you get over the boredom? Well, one of the ways was to get stone out of one's mind.
Shall I pour it in?
2 weeks ago, at the new moon, George laid down his first brew since the war, a mixture of yeast, water and jam, to try and recreate the famous Colditz jam alc.
The equipment for the still was purloined from the German kitchen. They serve soup in things called cubles, which are large sort of aluminium dustbins.
A mix going here.
The brew is sealed into the cubles, just as it was in Colditz, with plaster of Paris.
We get this from the medical people. Sick bay. I had this in case anybody needed a plaster on a broken finger or something like that.
I think this might do. Which end do you want it on? That one, this one.
The rest of the still, we needed an outer water jacket, which was drain piping, which was removed from part of the drainage system of the chapel, and bits of copper tubing from the general plumbing in the camp to make the central tube through which the liquid would go. So we heated it on the stove, and we connected the water jacket of the still to the local cold water tap, and that really was it.
See, one was happy to do this because he was thinking of the end product the whole time, and how lovely it would be when it all started to bubble through. And that stuff actually should be way over 100 proof.
You can have a first go, George. Be brave.
Dear God. It doesn't smell quite as bad as it used to.
Let me smell it.
Maybe it doesn't smell bad.
Doesn't smell at all bad.
Maybe we could.
That smells drinkable.
We could market this.
Yes.
Oh, Christ. My first really recollection of drinking was New Year's Eve 1943, which everybody was brewing madly to have a party.
The jam alc was a hit, and calendars were scrutinized for any excuse for a party. Valentine's, Leap Year and St. Patrick's Day were all celebrated. Invasion brews were laid down, and when no invasion came, they drowned their sorrows. But many were reckless, and none were prepared for the strength of their hooch and the dangers of DIY distilling.
Some messes used to go blind on some occasions because it's really nothing more than methylated spirits.
I tried it once and it turned your tongue black.
Certainly, it took the fillings out of your teeth.
And of course, the other thing that happened was they could never steer a steady course. So if you ever met a man with funny-looking teeth, and he couldn't talk, and he couldn't walk straight, he was called Jam Happy. That was the booze.
While the hooch offered one diversion, another invention by similarly resourceful prisoners offered another.
The castle was full of randy young men, and there was no means that one could really see any of the female sex. So Checo, who was a remarkable character, devised the system of using broken spectacle lenses inside cardboard, some of which was supplied from the inside of loo paper rolls. Very often it was used with a bit of fat, because cardboard against cardboard doesn't necessarily slide properly, the focus being got by sliding in and out. And very often you would hear, in the middle of the day or later in the afternoon, window number 4, third house from the right. And the letoscope would go up like this, and you would focus onto the necessary window. And if you were lucky, you saw something, and if you were unlucky, you didn't. You might see a female undressing, you might see a little bit of sexual activity, which of course caused an enormous amount of furore, as you can imagine. Because the only females we had here were male ones dressed up.
The leading ladies were incredibly convincing. They really did try and make up to look like proper women. I remember feeling actually quite sort of embarrassed to find oneself standing up behind one of these chaps in the shower, because they all had long hair, obviously, they'd grown it for these parts. And one began to wonder what was going on.
I don't think, as far as I know, there was any active sex, homosexuality, none that I know of at all. I was going to say the public school code prevailed, but when one remembers public schools and what went on at public schools, it would hardly be a compliment to Colditz, really.
To my mind, I miss the sight of a naked woman more than I can think. And therefore, why not carve it? But I don't know whether you've ever done any wood whittling, but it does take over after a time. She happened to come in February, the last month I remember carving. I must have done about 40 or 50 of them, I suppose. The only trouble is memory was lacking.
For some, the mental effects of long-term confinement were starting to show.
Can you imagine living in this room for 3 years? You're seeing the same faces, the same people. But the same in the courtyard, because the sun only used to come in the courtyard. Midsummer, I think, it used to go into one part of the courtyard. But other than that, you're in a shadow all the time. And the winter months were very long, snow and everything. It can get monotonous, can get boring to go around and around like a squirrel in a cage. One little chap, I forget, oh Lord, he used to run down the steps and have something in his hand and take it to the commandant, salute, say something and run back into the ranks. And if you're next to him, he push you, keep pushing you, saying the gremlins, it's the gremlins, they'll get you.
People became quite strange. Some people had repetitive habits, and some even got repatriated because of it.
Prisoners were allowed home if they were certified as being physically or mentally ill.
In the midst of such appalling horrors going on all around, there's something very civilized, that prisoners of war were repatriated, and German prisoners of war repatriated back to Germany, presumably. There was the protecting power, there's the Geneva Convention, which the Germans observed for us.
Some saw the repatriation system as a means of escape. Called working your ticket, illnesses were faked to fool the Germans. Francis Flynn chose this method. He'd been an active escaper since he arrived in Colditz in 1941. Consequently, he held the record for the number of consecutive days in solitary.
If there was an occasion, if I could go, I'd volunteer straight away. Keep at it, because the odds are better for you if you keep trying than if you just sit around and mope. I wasn't getting the breaks, and there were very little left. That's when people were building up aeroplanes in the attic and things like that for want of seeing ways of getting out.
Feigning madness was frowned upon. A slip-up might jeopardize the chances of a genuine sufferer. If Francis was going to carry it off, he'd have no help from the escape committee.
The things I had to go through to get repatriated in that way were introspection, at meals to drop your head and just lose interest, and generally behaving in a different manner, because that's what people are that are a bit affected. They're different from other people. And if there's a big enough difference, then you can be categorized and said that's a mental illness. It's advisable never to let out any escape attempts to anybody. The walls have ears, particularly in Colditz, so nobody knew of my intentions.
He might have tried. I never knew that. I took him to be as he was, quiet, not friendly with anyone, really. To himself always, walking around the courtyard by himself.
It was just a matter of making a convincing show for the Germans.
Francis kept up the act for over a year. Finally, he was put before the Repatriation Commission. He convinced them and was allowed to go home.
I remember being taken down to the doors of the castle and left standing outside. It was an overwhelming feeling to see further than the walls. And I could feel water trickling down from my eyes, both eyes, not crying, just water pouring down my face. That was a reaction, that was the memory I have of freedom. That's what freedom can mean.